Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today right here on The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z. This is Ellen Kamai, the Natural Nurse, wishing you the best. And we love to hear from you. You can always get in touch at Facebook, The Natural Nurse, or naturalnurse.com. Either way works really well, and we like to know how you feel about our shows. We get so much feedback, and we get back to everyone we can personally, answering your questions, and also people like to know what they can do about living a life in the natural world, I would say. One thing that many people are interested in is how can they move their professional life to incorporate natural medicine and to actually be doing that all the time as part of what they do to support themselves on the planet. And there is so much. We have an entire class called Career Paths in Natural Medicine. One of the choices that might be right for a lot of people is becoming an RH. That's a registered herbalist. And there is a very specific path to that, and it is the most widely recognized certificate in herbal medicine. So that's a path, and there are many, many others, such as myself. I'm a natural nurse, and Dr. Eugene Zamperone, who's a naturopathic physician. But wherever you are, perhaps you're a graphic designer, but you'd like to work in graphic design in the many nutraceutical industry companies so that you're actually discussing natural remedies all day. It's really endless. So that's what we investigate in our career paths in natural medicine. We have so many online classes, and that's not new to us. We've been doing online classes for years and years, and many of our online classes offer CE certificates, which give you credits if you are a nurse practitioner, a registered dietitian, a massage therapist, an acupuncturist, and many other licensed professionals get CE credits for taking our classes, either online or in person. So you can go to naturalnurse.com and look at calendar for many of the upcoming classes. Last week we did leaky gut. That's still available as an archive. It's really an endless, let's say, information source. And go to naturalnurse.com. You can find out more. Today, we are so happy to have as our guest Dr. Curtis Turchin. Dr. Turchin is considered one of the experts in the field of light and laser therapy. Boy, we really do need to bring some light into our lives at this time, specifically for the treatment of acute and chronic pain. He personally has been using light therapy for himself and in his practice for 35 years. And he was Director of Clinical Services for Bales Scientific, who developed the first FDA-cleared light device and is presently Director of Clinical Sciences for light and laser companies. He has published 4 books and more than 20 journal articles and has been extensively interviewed on radio and television. He is the author of the book Light and Light Therapy, Clinical Procedures, described as the authoritative text in clinical light treatment, as well as LED and light therapy. Also, veterinary laser therapy and treating addiction with light therapy. So that is a wonderful book to have. He has taught therapists and doctors all over the world in the U.S., Europe, Japan, Brazil, Canada, as well as Guatemala. And he has a bachelor's degree in pre-medical studies in psychology from the University of Southern California, a master's degree from San Francisco State University, and also a doctor of chiropractic degree from Parma College, which is my sister's alma mater. He is in private practice in the Sonoma wine country. Thank you so much for joining us today, Dr. Curtis.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, you're coming through loud and clear. I'm happy to hear that. And I want to go back in time, and let's take some time to talk about you. What led you to want to have a career in natural medicine?
Well, actually, I was pre-medical, pre-dental at University of Southern California. And I thought that maybe I would try dentistry rather than medicine, because back in the 60s and 70s, basically most medical doctors would have the patient walk in the room, they'd write a prescription, then they'd walk out. And that just didn't seem very interesting to me. I realize now that I probably could have gone into medical school. I could have specialized in a more holistic or natural approach. But at that point, I thought, well, maybe I'll try dentistry. So I got actually into the dental school at USC, which was the top-rated dental school in the nation at the time. And I realized it just wasn't going to be a good fit for me. So I dropped out, obviously much to my parents' chagrin. And then started to pursue other avenues. I looked into education and got a master's degree in special education, specializing in learning disabilities. And then I found myself getting more interested in natural therapies for these kids. And that led me to something you're interested in, which is herbal medicine, natural therapies involving nutrition, and also movement therapies. And the movement therapies got me involved in thinking about body work, deep tissue work, chiropractic, physical therapy. So I went to chiropractic school, and I got my degree as a chiropractor, and I had my license, and I practiced that way. But really, my interests are very broad. I'm not one of those chiropractors that just brings you in for 2 minutes. I like to work very holistically with my patients. I've got a lot of training in herbal medicine, a lot of training in light and laser therapy, and a lot of training in other areas, which are probably too diverse to mention. But I have studied a wide range of natural therapies and use those in my practice.
So it was an early interest of yours. And when you say that physicians come in the room and just hand the prescription, I think that has degraded and become much worse. Nowadays, what happens at most conventional visits is that the doctor hardly looks at and certainly does not touch or smell or really interact with most individuals. They are on the other side of the room by the computer terminal, looking over their shoulder while they desperately search for a specific code to put into the computer so that the office visit can be billed. And this is not their fault. This is how it's set up. So I think it's gone from very bad to much worse.
Well, you know, one of my very close friends is a medical doctor, and he's a professor at Stanford Medical School. So obviously he's no slouch. And when he goes to a doctor visit, he always brings another doctor with him because he feels that he's very often not understood by the doctor, and that the doctor often doesn't examine him properly. So here's a medical doctor who's a professor at Stanford Medical School, and even he wants a friend who's a doctor with him to make sure things are done properly. Because, and I'm not blaming doctors, I'm blaming the system, and you and I think, are in agreement about this. And what happens is the doctor has 5 or 10 minutes. And so rather than doing a proper physical examination and looking in your ears and your eyes and your throat and, you know, doing all these physical examination tests that take time, they say, we'll run some lab work, we'll do some blood tests, and we'll do some imaging, and then they walk out the door. And that's probably part of the problem we have in this country with litigation, where the doctors feel like at least if they have the blood labs and they have the images, they have something objective to use. And so one thing my good friend, the physician, believes is that we've created a system where doctors are reinforced for not doing a proper physical examination, which is exactly what you're talking about.
Yes, that's true. And, you know, really having time and spending, you know, time with the client. Now, in your work, and a lot of it has to do with research, what led you to, in particular, light therapy?
Well, I was always curious about different modalities, and I had my practice, but I was getting interested in thermal imaging, and I worked for a company called Bales Scientific. They hired me as their director of clinical sciences, and they were trying to get through the FDA. I don't want to go into this in any depth, but there was basically a collusion between one of the major imaging companies and the FDA, and they actually blocked this company from producing an FDA-approved thermal imaging device. But anyway, while I was working for that company, they also had a laser device. And so they put me in charge of educating chiropractors, physical therapists, physicians, dentists, doctors, et cetera, about light therapy. And I got very interested in it. And this was back, in the mid to late 80s, before it was even approved. So I started using light therapy in the mid 80s. And at that point, it was actually illegal to use, even though it was legal in Europe. And I had to ask my patients to sign a waiver saying that this was an experimental modality. Now, here's a modality that unless it's a hot surgical laser, there's absolutely no documentation that there's any danger.
Oh, so you're saying that it was odd to have to sign some kind of release when they're sort of clumping it into some other kind of therapy that really is not appropriate, because this kind that you're talking about does not have any possible adverse effect.
No, it really doesn't. It's extremely safe. And what happened was the military had learned from NASA that their astronauts, when they cut their fingers or their hands, if they were in charge of growing the vegetables, because they had little, gardens in outer space when they're in these long-term space capsules. And they were reporting to NASA that their hands were healing if they happened to have an injury and were in charge of that process. So NASA then started studying this, and they found that it actually was dramatic at stimulating healing. And basically, the military told the FDA, you approve these devices. And within months, the FDA approved it. So that's how the whole thing happened. It was really the military that pushed it, because there's 4,000 to 5,000 positive studies that show that light therapy is extremely effective for all kinds of problems.
So now the military is usually able to initiate therapeutics, maybe with less regulation, because of whatever standards they have. So they get to experiment with newer therapies, and they found that this was very effective. For what?
Well, for treating wounds, because it's very effective at healing wounds. There's a group in the military called DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. And that group was developing, some very unique things. For example, they've been still working on what kind of material could we have in a soldier's uniform that would generate electricity, so that uniform and the chemicals in that outfit would create electricity, and that would then power a little light therapy device that they could put on wounds and injuries. Because there's tons of studies proving that light therapy actually stimulates the healing of wounds. It makes sprains and strains and all kinds of injuries heal more effectively. And at this point, this is an interesting little tidbit. Harvard Medical School and also Johns Hopkins, they both have departments of photomedicine. And these are two of the top research medical centers in the world. And they're researching light therapy for not only just sprains and strains, but for recovery from chemotherapy or radiation, from Parkinson's disease, from post-traumatic stress disorder, all kinds of problems that most people don't think about. We often think about light therapy as being a pain solution, but it isn't just a pain solution. It's also a solution for healing many other types and areas of the body, including the brain.
So it has more extensive therapeutic value than only pain control.
Yes, and the number of areas that are possible is expanding all the time. There's lots of research showing you can actually put light on someone's chest, on the sternum, and it will penetrate into the heart and make the heart healthier. It's very useful for stimulating cartilage regeneration. And in terms of something you're interested in, which is herbal medicine, there's research showing that if you want to get a drug or an herb to any particular area, let's say you want to do something like help a patient who has what you might call arthritis of the knee, which is kind of a mild wearing away of the cartilage. It's usually wear and tear. But let's say you want to give that person glucosamine sulfate with MSM, which has been shown to help cartilage, or you put them on something else. Well, how do you get that molecule into the knee? Well, one way to get it into the knee is to then use light therapy on that knee, because that stimulates the cells, and the cells get more active, and there's a higher uptake of any chemicals you might put in someone's system. Because otherwise you're relying upon a very slow and laborious penetration of any herb, supplement, or medicine to get into that knee. But if you use light therapy, it gets in very rapidly. And this has been studied well. And there's a number of companies that are using light therapy or low dosage radiation for chemotherapy and cancer. And they're finding that they can then take that medication and specifically target that tumor rather than having to expose the whole body to that fairly toxic chemical. So it can be used for a number of things.
Wait a minute. That sounds pretty exciting. Hold on a second there. You're saying that they have done experimentation using light therapy with tumors?
Yeah, it's a branch of photomedicine, and what they use is a photosensitive chemotherapy.
I want to share something with you here. I was a student at Rutgers, and this was in might have been 1970. It was in 1970. And I was involved in this research project there where what they were doing was, and this was animal models, they were injecting chlorophyll into tumors and then putting in through an optic fiber light directly into that area where the chlorophyll was released into the tumor. And then they found that there was various kinds of aerobic activity that occurred that released oxygen and did help to destroy the tumors. I don't know if that's the kind of thing you're talking about or how the light you're talking about may have been used.
Well, that's one way of doing it, absolutely, Ellen. The other way is that they've also used lasers. And, of course, a laser will penetrate into the body.
So just through the skin?
Of photons. Pardon me?
That would just be through the skin?
Yes. Now, you can take a fiber optic tube and insert it into the tumor. The only problem with that is that when you have a closed tumor, you do have to worry about breaking that up with any kind of device, whether you're doing testing or whether you're treating. Because when you break that tumor, if it's enclosed, you do run some risk of having that spread. So that's
sense.
one way. The alternative ways is to use a laser that stimulates through photomedicine application, waking up the chemicals in that chemotherapy. Or you can also use very targeted low-dose radiation and have that chemotherapy enlivened or awakened by using low-dose radiation. So there's many ways of using light, lasers, low-dose radiation for stimulating those chemotherapies.
Well, I would just like to also share that after the great success of those trials, all funding got cut for that project. Which is, unfortunately not surprising, but certainly frustrating.
Yeah, well, the problem is that most medical companies and pharmaceutical companies, they basically are selling, very well researched products that are toxic. And they're trying to kill bacteria, kill viruses, kill all kinds of bugs, kill cancer. And so what they're going to do is they're going to continually, because they have very strong control within the government through their different agencies, continue to push the use of those chemicals. Now, luckily, we're seeing this new field of using the body's own energy, whether it's through natural therapies or drugs, to stimulate the immune system to go and eliminate these bugs or kill them. And that is a really positive field. We're seeing this also with COVID, where they're trying to figure out how to harness the immune system, whether you're talking about zinc or hydroxychloroquine, or whether you're talking about different kinds of things to stimulate B cells and T cells. They're finding new ways to use the body's more natural processes to go after these bugs rather than just poisoning them. So, there's a battle right now between standard pharma and the other kinds of biological devices that are in many ways more complex, but are offering in many ways a better therapeutic outcome.
Right, with a lower incidence of adverse effects.
Exactly.
So there is, and certainly even just diet therapy and exercise would be, and doctors really in the 8 to 10 minutes they have, they'll just say, yeah, we'll eat healthy, but no actually therapeutic nutritional intervention.
Yeah, well, I'm laughing now because I've had so many patients that I've sent to cardiologists. And I say, if you go there, see if they'll work with you on your diet. And they tell me, well, the cardiologist doesn't have a nutritionist on staff.
Really, we're talking about well-documented, evidence-based medicine. So when we're talking about something like what is evidence-based, what has the least cost per therapeutic intervention, what has the best adverse effect versus positive effect ratio, that is so often natural modalities, and light therapy can be listed there. So my goal now in my career, and I've been doing this 54 years, is actually to bring these modalities into what would be called standard of practice, which would be the first intervention, not the last?
Well, that's a good point, and I think a lot of people are interested in COVID because COVID-19 is all over the news.
Well, let's share our thoughts about COVID, Doctor.
What's my thoughts about it?
Yeah.
Well, I think that the problem is that the medical establishment is tending to enter the therapeutic process when the patient is already going to the ICU and possibly on a ventilator. But there are many things, as you know, Ellen, that people can start doing early on if they have a mild case. If someone has if someone's asymptomatic, you can just say, well, eat well, because as you know, the number one risk factor, since it is a problem with the endothelium, the number one risk factor is diabetes, which also weakens all the connective tissue. And the second is other things like cardiomyopathy. But they're waiting till the person's ready to be on the ventilator. But there should be a government program to say, get regular exercise, take your vitamin D, take your zinc, take your antiviral herbs, do all these things that are proven, evidence-based medicine that are proven to reduce your risk of getting sick. And then if you get flu-like symptoms, then go to phase 2 and start taking more powerful herbs, more powerful supplements, maybe high-dose vitamin C, things like that we know can help viral infections. But instead what we do is we wait until it's the patient's at death's door, and then we try to intervene with heroic medicine. So I think the problem is we're waiting too long, Ellen. I think you'd probably agree with that.
Absolutely, and that's true in general. We're going to take a little break here. I'd like to remind you that you're listening to The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z, and our guest today is Dr. Curtis Turchin, and he is giving us brilliant information about light therapy, and he's written some really fantastic books such as Light and Light Therapy, Clinical Procedures that you may want to get a handle on. And when we come back, we will continue our discussion with Dr. Curtis about this wonderful kind of therapeutic intervention that should be very, very widely available called light therapy. We'll be right back with more right here on The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z.
On this edition of the Natural Medicine Chest, we'll discuss the essential oil taken from the Australian tea tree.
The tea tree, known as Melaleuca alternifolia, grows in only one region of the world, the northeast corner of Australia. It is a full-size tree of the myrtle family, whose oil has powerful abilities to clean and help heal wounds and skin ailments such as cuts, burns, and rashes. In 1770, the infamous Captain Cook was a lieutenant in the British Royal Navy when his ship landed in Australia. The botanist on board, Sir Joseph Banks, collected samples of a sticky aromatic leaf and brought them back to England for further investigation.
In 1923, an Australian curator and chemist, Dr. Penfold, conducted a study on tea tree leaves and discovered that their essential oils are 13 times stronger as an antiseptic bactericide than carbolic acid, considered the standard in the early 1900s. The oil contains 50 to 60% terpenes, 6 to 8% cineol, which causes its camphor-like odor, and several kinds of alcohols. In 1933, the Australian Journal of Pharmacy, the American Journal of the National Medical Association, and the British Medical Journal reported that tea tree oil is a powerful disinfectant, non-poisonous, non-irritating, and has been used successfully in a very wide range of septic conditions. Australian tea tree oil is mentioned in the British Pharmaceutical Codex of 1949, the UK Medicine List, and the Dispensary of the United States.
During World War II, tea tree oil was considered a standard issue item for all first aid kits for Army and Navy units in tropical regions. The demand for tea tree oil exceeded the supply. However, after World War II, synthetic drugs gained in popularity and the use of tea tree oil in medicine waned. In more recent times, a renewed interest in natural, non-toxic alternatives has triggered a resurgence in tea tree oil research. In 1985, Dr. Paul Belachet, chief of the phytotherapy department at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Paris, worked on several double-blind studies involving tea tree oil and its application as a remedy for candidiasis, chronic cystitis, staph and strep infections, and nail bed fungus. He stated, and we quote, "The essential oil of Melaleuca has entered the team of major essential oils and emerges as an antiseptic and antifungal weapon of the first order in phytoaromatherapy."
Try a few drops of tea tree oil in a steam vaporizer and inhale for blocked sinuses, or rub the oil on chest and back for a cough. The Australian Journal of Dentistry reported that using tea tree oil in dental hygiene and in surgery showed it to be an extremely effective antiseptic. Add a drop on your toothbrush or include it as a gargle and mouthwash. Tea tree oil can be applied directly to the skin. Although it's possible that some people may experience a mild allergic reaction, in-depth research has shown tea tree oil to be non-irritating and safe.
So, listeners, think about including tea tree oil, the first aid kit in a bottle, in your natural medicine chest.
More right here on The Natural Nurse. And Dr. Z, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Ellen Kamai, The Natural Nurse, and you can find us at Facebook, The Natural Nurse, Ellen Kamai, or naturalnurse.com. I think that's the best place to go because there you can investigate our ongoing class list. If you click on calendar, we have all the up-and-coming classes. Some of them are actually in person. We had one in person, a beach walk, looking at edible and medicinal wild plants here in Oyster Bay, Long Island last week. That was great because mostly, of course, we're doing online classes. However, they do still count for CE credits for professionals, and those include naturopathic physicians, chiropractors, nurses, NPs, licensed massage therapists, midwives, acupuncturists. So if you don't have any of those licenses, you can always take our classes, and you can use them towards developing a certificate called an RH, which is a registered herbalist, or towards the Natural Nurse Herbal Certification course, or just for your own knowledge. So it's really open to all, and then for some people has the added advantage of conferring CE credits. Today, we are so happy to have as our guest Dr. Curtis Turchin, and he is considered one of the experts in the field of light therapy, which we're talking about today. He's written several books, including Light and Light Therapy, Clinical Procedures, and also LED and light therapy, veterinary laser therapy, and treating addictions with light therapy. All of those are fantastic topics. You can find out more at LZRULTRA. So it's LZRUltrabright.com. And also a link to Dr. Curtis's email and that website will be on our archives. So you can visit that shortly after the show today or any time ongoing. So back to you, Dr. Curtis. Thank you for all those interesting things you've been sharing with us. Can you tell us the difference between laser and the light therapy that you're talking about, or is it one and the same?
Well, laser therapy and light or LED therapy are basically, they're almost identical. The difference is that when you have a laser, the photon goes into a little chamber, it's bounced around, and it's kind of spit out with a little bit of extra pressure. Whereas with an LED or a light-emitting diode, it kind of wanders out more slowly. So studies show that they're almost identical in their action. Lasers have a little bit more power, but and this is an important but, you can now get an LED light with 5 or 10 times the amount of light therapy that you would get from a laser at 1/10 the cost. So, for example, in my work, we're designing LEDs that have things like 10,000, 12,000 milliwatts. And those devices, which can be $1,000 or less, are actually going to cost $10,000 or more if they're a laser. So I would say until recently the laser was the gold standard, Ellen, but now the power of the LED light and the quality of that light continues to improve dramatically, much faster than laser therapy. And the reason is because most of the world is moving toward LED lighting. And so the whole world is working on making better, more powerful, more sophisticated LED lights, and that's benefiting our field. So lasers are great, but the coming wave is going to be LEDs.
So what about some of the research showing that LEDs actually can have negative implications, particularly if they shine directly on the retina of the eye?
Well, that's actually a very good question because if you have what's called a collimated laser, which is a laser like a laser pointer, which could be only a few milliwatts, like 2 or 3 milliwatts, there's more danger to the eyes from a $10 or $15 laser pointer with 2 or 3 milliwatts than there is with a 10,000 or 12,000 milliwatt LED. And the interesting fact, Ellen, this is probably something that I think you'll enjoy hearing about. They're now finding that light therapy, if it's diffuse like an LED, has been shown to regenerate the retina. They're showing it to regenerate the macula. So this is another area where if you're using nutrition, now a caveat of this is this has not been approved by the FDA. So it's not a cleared indication, but the research is mounting day by day that shows that light therapy actually helps to stimulate the healing of the inner structures of the eye. Now, that's not true with a collimated laser like a laser pointer or a surgical laser, but it is true with the diffuse light of something like an LED. It actually is not dangerous, and you do not need to wear goggles when you are using an LED. But if you have a high-powered collimated laser, you must wear goggles to protect your eyes.
What about the regular laser light bulbs, which everything is switching to?
You mean the LED light bulb?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, so the problem with standard light is that it has a lot of different wavelengths. You've probably heard, you want to put on some sunblock to avoid ultraviolet light, because UVA and UVB, ultraviolet A, ultraviolet B, those are both damaging for the skin. So you put on sunblock. But there's many, many wavelengths in standard sunlight that are very beneficial. Like it helps to improve your processing of vitamin D. So, but the problem with sunlight, Ellen, is that there's so many different wavelengths that it doesn't penetrate safely through the skin. But there is a number of wavelengths that are within what we call the optical window, which is 600 to 900 nanometers. That's what we call infrared or red light. And in that wavelength, it actually penetrates very deeply through the skin and is extremely safe and has minimal to no side effects. So it's a question of wavelength and a question of the concentration of that wavelength. Although Hippocrates has in some of his literature that he would take herbs that he felt were photosensitive, and he'd put them on the organs of people and ask them to lie in the sunlight, and that would potentiate the effect of the herbs. I don't know if this has been studied.
Wow, I love that
anyway.
because I'm teaching about, ancient medicine, like Hildegard's medical teachings, and I never heard that about Hippocrates. I'm going to have to look into which herbs he might have used. I wonder if St. John's wort was one of them, because that definitely has a photosensitive component.
Yeah, it absolutely does. And
fascinating. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I love doing radio. I've been doing it for, a long time, about, since 19. I think we started our first radio show in 1987, I believe. So I'm always learning new things from my guests. Thank you so much for that. That's fascinating. And also, with your description, Dr. Curtis, of the complexity of the situation. So it's not even like light is light, or that LED light is all the same, or, laser light is all the same. Because I have heard what you shared about even buying a pointer that you would use like with a PowerPoint presentation, and that could be dangerous if it goes directly in someone's eye. Or what about, since you have a book also on veterinary laser therapy, if you're playing with a cat like they do with those little pointy lasers, could that be dangerous if it shines right in the cat's eye?
Yes, it could. And that's why you want to stay away from these what we call a collimated laser beam. Any very straight, narrow beam is called a collimated laser, and that's where the danger is to the eyes. If you have a very diffuse beam, Ellen, there's absolutely no danger whatsoever.
So it's how the beam is projected from whatever the device is that's creating the light beam.
Yeah. So, for example, you're bringing up the idea of animals. Well, the nice thing about an animal is that there's really no placebo. I mean, I suppose if you pet the animal while you're doing it, that could be somewhat of a placebo. But, for example, animals who have a problem with their hip, because hip problems are very common in animals. And some animals, like dachshunds, they have low back problems. Other animals have problems with their necks. And you can use light therapy on your animal, and you'll get almost immediate results with most conditions, because light therapy is analgesic, which means it limits the amount of pain. It stimulates healing, and it stimulates circulation. So it has all these benefits, yet is extremely safe. But that's a great recipe for, a bad hip or a bad knee or a bad neck. So, for example, in the area of very expensive animals, for example, like a racehorse, it could be worth millions
of
dollars.
There's so much great research done on them because somebody's willing to spend the money on it.
Exactly. And when you go to a stable, you'll see that virtually every trainer has a laser or an LED for those horses. In fact, when I started getting involved with laser therapy, I basically started buying devices that were only cleared for animal use, because the FDA doesn't really care what you use on your animals, really. They care about humans. And so we were able to get European lasers and LEDs that were only being used on animals, and of course we used them on humans, and guess what? The success was just as good with a human as with an animal. And so now you see a plethora of lasers and LEDs on the market because there is so much research proving its efficacy.
So in your book, Veterinary Laser Therapy, I'm sure you describe some of those therapeutics that might be useful for people's pets at home as well.
Yeah, so I've got 3 books. One is called Light and Laser Therapy Clinical Procedures, and that's basically about laser therapy with a little bit about LEDs. These are all on Amazon. The other is LED and light therapy, which is more focused on LEDs, which is what we were talking about earlier. And the other is called Veterinary Laser Therapy. And so the reason for this is because lasers have value, LEDs have value, and it doesn't matter whether you're treating a human, a microbe, or an animal. It has value for all of those living things.
And they're not all exactly the same. Also, you've shared a lot with us, Dr. Curtis, about the fact that we need to be aware of what kind of light therapy we might be using. They're not all the same because you're talking about if they're delivered in a column or they're delivered in a more diffuse way, and I'm sure there's a lot having to do with wavelength and different penetration levels, so you do need to have some knowledge to use it effectively.
Yes, and that's why, when we sell an LED device, we have my book with it because we want our customers to be educated because a lot of people use light devices and they use it incorrectly. I'm sure, and especially with herbal medicine, you see the same thing, Ellen, where with phytotherapy, someone will buy, let's say they buy some vitamin C and the bottle says, take a 300 milligram tablet once a day. Well, you and I both know that if someone is coming down with, let's say, a bronchial infection, that's not going to do anything. And you know that a lot of naturally oriented doctors, naturopaths, chiropractors will use things like 5 or 10,000 milligrams. So it's important to understand how to use whatever you're using and not just use it and think it's going to work or not work without being properly educated.
Well, that's really, really interesting that you have developed very specific devices and you've been part of those kinds of devices so people are getting the right kind. Yeah, well, my first laser was a 5 milliwatt laser that I got in 1983, and it wasn't approved at that time by the FDA. It wasn't cleared, and that cost me $10,000, and that was basically $10,000 for something with the power of a laser pointer. And now, for $1,000 or less, you can get something that's not 5 milliwatts, but something that's 10,000 milliwatts or 12,000 milliwatts. So what that means is that you can treat an area now with these innovations for 10, 20, 30 seconds, and then you're done. And the reason for that, this is true, Ellen, with any kind of natural therapy. If it takes a long time, people will not do it. They will not use it. And so if you tell someone that to make themselves healthy, they're going to have to go out, they're going to have to buy a juicer, they're going to have to spend 10 minutes cleaning the vegetables, 10 minutes juicing them, and then 15 minutes cleaning the juicer, they're going to go, well, I don't think I'll do that. Well, that's why I tell them to consider a NutriBullet because everything's really instant and cleanup is about 3 seconds. So you're right. Yeah, exactly. So the same thing is true with light therapy. And I've seen, since I've been using light therapy for, 40 years, what I've seen is if someone can use it for 30 seconds to a minute and get significant results, they're going to go back and use that product on a regular basis. But if you have these very underpowered products that are very popular,
and they're produced by companies that don't understand devices, you'll find that people aren't feeling good about the value of that product. And the same is true with nutraceuticals, as you're saying. If a company is selling herbs or supplements, the most important thing isn't that they make it. The most important thing is after you make it, that you educate the consumer on how to use it, because that's where the rubber meets the road, is using natural therapies properly so you get an efficacious result and not just have people that say, well, it didn't work for me.
That's true. But, usually in terms of healing, especially some of these things you're talking about, like pain, the person does have to participate. There usually is a requirement to change your diet, change your lifestyle, use these natural therapeutics rather than just, you do it, you fix me. We wish that would work, but that's not always that easy.
Well, what I use is a step-by-step approach. And the first thing I ever give a patient is something extremely simple. Like with light therapy, I'd say, okay, you can rent my powerful LED, take it home, and put it on the spot for 30 seconds. And then if you feel like you want to do more, put another 15 seconds or 30 seconds more, and that's it. If I give someone exercise therapy, I say, hey, I'm going to give you 2 exercises only. If you do those 2 exercises and you beg me, I'll give you 3.
That's a good idea.
Yes. You take, pardon me?
I think that's a great idea because it's less overwhelming, and also they have a specific thing to do, which eliminates too many choices.
And there was a study done last year where they looked at a study on how do we change people's behavior. And the interesting thing is they only came up with one answer from their research study on many, many individuals, was that the step has to be small. So you have to ask people to do things in very small increments. And you and I both know, Ellen, that if you give someone an assignment like, say, your knee is hurting, take 1 glucosamine sulfate MSM 3 times a day and come back in a week or 2 and tell me how you're doing. Or take something else. The person will say, gee, I feel a little bit better. I'm having trouble sleeping. What can I take? Well, you can take VPH, valerian passion flower hops. You can throw in a little bit of L-theanine or a little bit of 5-HTP. But start with this one thing. How did that work? I think I slept a little better. Well, maybe add some 5-HTP. Gee, I slept like a log. So by doing these little steps with light therapy or anything else, we find that people are extremely compliant. So it's the small, what did Ben Franklin say, Ellen? He said, little strokes fell great oaks. So the important thing with natural therapy is to use small steps.
Right, take one step and then another. And so what you're saying, Dr. Curtis, is that within the realm of natural therapeutic safe and effective treatments, light therapy should certainly be more a part of that on a wider basis, given its extreme effectiveness, evidence-based in many cases, and the low incidence of any kind of adverse effect.
Yeah, well, I would say all you have to do is go on PubMed, which is a national medical database, and you see that there's 5,000 studies on light therapy, so there's no question about that. And another interesting area about light therapy is ultraviolet. You're hearing about that with COVID since that's a hot topic. And in my office, before anyone sets a foot in my room, is I have a very powerful industrial-grade ultraviolet light, and I shine it on my table. I shine it on the places where people put their things. I shine it on the doorknobs, and that is proven, Ellen, to kill viruses in 2 seconds. So we're starting to learn about the fact that light therapy is going to be more and more ubiquitous. Think about this. Do you want to go on a cruise on a ship with 5,000 other people? Probably the answer is no.
Not right now, right?
Because you're worried about getting disease. You can get COVID. You can get Legionnaires. Well, what is coming out now is ultraviolet, either in the cabin. There's a new type of wavelength. And as you're saying, wavelength is key. Wavelength and power are the keys to the.
Well, Dr. Curtis, we have to end there because we're coming right to the end of our time. But thank you. We'll have to talk again another time and go into ultraviolet. And, of course, the best thing for people who want to learn more is to go to LZR ultrabright.com. That's LZR ultrabright.com to see a lot more information about the kind of lights that Dr. Curtis has been explaining to us and the healing power of light therapy. So thank you so much for being our guest today, Dr. Curtis.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And thank you, listeners, for joining us once again for another edition right here on The Natural Nurse and Dr. Z on Progressive Radio Network. We love to hear from you. Get in touch at naturalnurse.com. Until next time, this is Ellen Kamai, The Natural Nurse, hoping that you stay healthy.